So today, with the technology challenges, we're doing the Zoom, but it will be posted on Facebook and Instagram, so you can still access and see our Tuesday conversations with
Mhm.
friends. And we have Dr. Angela Chan, and who is a fantastic pianist and an educator. And I've just been really touched by the things she's been sharing with other educators as well as students. So without further ado, Dr. Chan, would you introduce yourself and we can start chatting about all those wonderful things you've shared with me?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you, Shirley, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here to share. My name is Dr. Angela Chan, and I take on multiple roles. I have been a piano teacher since 1984. I have groomed a lot of young students who ultimately aim for a performance career. Also, I'm the senior piano examiner for the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto. I also am the founder and director of Lambda School of Music and Fine Arts. So I wear different hats, but basically, one simple description is I am a musician. And I always remain a musician at heart, and I'm trying to teach the younger generation to share with them what I'm really passionate about.
Mhm. That's so wonderful. And I think a teacher has to be inspired in order to inspire their students. And you just always you've struck me as somebody who's very inspired and who has maintained that inspiration with yourself, and which I think is where we all have to begin. And can you tell us a little bit about how you started teaching and how you maintain this fire, this inspiration throughout your entire career, working with students and also as a pianist, as a musician yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Now, I started very young unofficially because my father introduced me to piano playing. But he is just an amateur piano player, not even a pianist. But at the home environment, I got groomed and I developed a very deep love for music. So, like the piano or the little electric keyboard was my toy that I grew up with. So music has formed a very deep bonding between me and my parents, and I loved it. Now, very unfortunately, at the early phases of my studies, I ran into teachers who were extraordinarily strict. I know they mean well, but it was from a different generation
Right.
where the values were different and obedience, discipline. It was less about the joy and the fun of learning. So I went through a teacher that was extremely strict, where the basics like hitting your knuckles with a ruler when you can't get it, or like she was a soprano, and she would really scream from the top of her lungs when I played the wrong note. So I was always scared when I would play a wrong note because I don't know when she would scream into my ears. So after after
And we
that,
are so loud. We are so loud.
it was it was really like scary, and you don't know when the scary moment will happen. That's the most scary part.
Right.
So like I started in a very difficult situation, but my love for music never waned, and it was fortunate that I had the journey of studying with very great mentors late in the later part of my life, where they spent a lot of time helping me redevelop my technique, because during the course when I was younger, I didn't really have the advantage or the benefit of getting the full pianistic training. I learned very much as an amateur. So a lot of time was spent in fixing the problems.
Right.
And what's worse was inherently I was very musical. So in order to compensate alongside with my technical limitations, I did a number of stupid things myself where I didn't practice in the right way, and I almost led to injury. So all this journey alongside, and one even more strong point that led to where I am at is I remember at critical moments of my life when I was 18, I heard a young pianist. Her name is also Angela. Around me, there were a lot of Angelas that they played piano really well. But at that time, I thought, how come it's not me? So I looked at them. There was one when I heard her. She was 8 years old, and I was 19. and she played really well. She played on TV at that time. She played the Gollywog's Cakewalk.
Oh yeah. Mm,
Honest to truth, at
eight.
18, I couldn't play it well. I couldn't play it well. And I looked at this little girl on a TV show, a variety show, and she played it so well. And I started to ask myself one question.
Mhm.
How come she's so good? How come these people they excel so much at a young age? Are they gifted or I'm just plain dumb? So I want to know why. I want to know why cause these young individuals to be so capable. Is it really that they're born talented, or is it some kind of journey they went through that's extraordinary that lead them to their success, as compared to mine, which comprises of journeys of lot of a lot of failures. So I
Mm,
decided to follow the roots and understand what makes someone succeed. And is giftedness really something innate, or it could be acquired through appropriate teaching? And
mm,
understanding what the environment is providing the young person to develop that leads to the success. So this always bothered me until I studied in my master's degree, where I looked into the concept of what constitutes musical giftedness.
mm,
And
mm.
all in a nutshell, it tells me it's not that you're born with it, but it's cultivation from the external environment and how they help you. So, with that in mind, now it kind of solved one part of my query about why these young individuals are so outstanding, but it still hasn't solved my problem. So, they're great, they have a great process. How come I am so inept and am I really dumb? And how should I overcome my interferences? And by doing that, how can I help others who have a similar situation? So,
Mm.
in my doctoral degree, I studied how to how to overcome performance interferences in people who are late bloomers, who did not have the advantage to go through this early childhood education of bringing the very best for their capabilities or their potential to fruition. So I looked into the situations from both ends.
Mm.
Why are they successful and why do the other people fail? So understanding the whole context from both ends enables me really to set up a pedagogical approach that brings forth the potential and avoids any of the pitfalls that will hamper the development of an otherwise individual who can be fully capable and with their potential realized. So I implement what I learned in these areas in my graduate studies and my research, which now I'm implementing on the students. And I find this way to be very helpful to me and my students because now they are they do not go into problems which prevented them to start and flourish from the
Right,
beginning. Yeah.
right. Because I think a performance career, first of all, I think the world has changed a lot with YouTube, with Instagram, and with all those
Mhm.
social media. Because back in the days, um, it was one way and one way only. And really, if a pianist was not ready by age 16, you're
Mhm.
not going to be a performer.
Right.
And I think even though that's still true with a more traditional performance career, we have a lot more options. And
Mhm.
but you know, I there's a book I've really enjoyed, and I really try to work on it for myself as well as for with my students. By it's a Dr. Carol Dweck, and it's called the Mindset. And for the whole concept is the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And for so for instance, praising a child, you are
Mhm.
doing such a good job on the piano. I really appreciate your hard work. I can see you practiced, and look what you have done. You know, specifically point out the improvement versus, you know what? You are so talented. I'm so proud of you. See, the
Mhm.
problem is when you praise somebody for their talent, is they become afraid of trying anything they might fail. And if they fail at any attempt, and that failure is going to come
Mm-hmm.
with piano and with most other things if you continue to stick with it,
Mm-hmm.
because it's going to get harder. You will have challenges. But if
Mm-hmm.
you focus on, if I was born to do this, I should be able to do this, the moment you encounter that challenge, you will fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you become a person with a growth mindset, you realize you can work on this, and
Right.
you embrace the challenge, because when you embrace the challenge and you figure out how to do this, you know you're going to be on the other side, and you can be proud of what you have done, and you also become aware of the fact that if you're willing to try and if you're willing to learn and step back and maybe try something different,
Mm-hmm.
you can be more than what you think you are. And so that's what struck me as something that's really wonderful with your approach. And I'd like to maybe go a little deeper on the practical side of it, because you know, a lot of people have this perception of Asian artists, whether it's for gymnastics or piano or violin, that we're very good technically, but we're not always very creative. But on the other hand, I think it's very important we have a solid foundation, good technique, good understanding of the music theory, and good understanding of the composer's styles and all that stuff, combined with the creativity. And could you talk more about the efficiency of learning that came from our Asian roots and the creativity that we have learned because we also had the privilege of being exposed to other masters of the West?
Mm-hmm. Of course. Like I see that like one common factor is that like most Asians are perceived to be like very hardworking. They're very disciplined, so they are capable of uh, doing great things because they are putting their time and energy to it. They're willing to work at it. Now, in terms of the technique, honestly, because the piano is a Western instrument
Right.
and it is still new to the Asian community. Of course, many of them went abroad and studied. I mean, discounting that, but it's still an instrument that is not inherent yet within the culture.
Mhm.
Now, some people said, well, Asians are less musical. I would tend to disagree with that deeply.
I'm right with you on that.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Because if you look at, okay, let's say the Chinese instruments, like the erhu with two
Yes,
strings,
you're
you
right.
can make it weep, you can make it cry. That extent of sensitivity, control, and musicality is unparalleled. Similarly, in other string instruments, whether you play the yangqin, the dulcimer, or the guzheng, with
Yes,
you have the direct contact with the lines. Now, with the strings, the
right.
challenge in piano, if I go back to piano, is that it is by design an instrument that you are dissociated from the strings, from the sound source. You have to manipulate your movements to create through a whole system of hammers to touch base with the strings to make your sound. So it's by design that it's very digital. You hit the key on or off, black or white,
Right, right.
but it doesn't mean that we are incapable of making that connection.
That's right.
It, so if we learn how to control those hammers, it's almost like picking up the dulcimer with the mallets in our hand. Now we can make the sound to be so malleable under our hands.
Right.
It's making that connection, which in most, I have to say, in most piano methods, and how it's presented in technique, is mostly focusing on technique as in how to do it. And the how to do it has later on be like developed in the sense that now there's a manual, you do this, but we seldom talk about how it sounds like in the
Yes.
technical training. Now, when we learned about Hanon, Pishna, Bayer, Czerny, there was very little attention paid to how they should sound. But there were compendiums of discussion about, oh, how you should move your hands and fingers and all that. Now, art to me is, and music is an art in sound.
Yes.
Without sound, we're not talking about music.
Right.
So if we work from the sound, and that is what we are focusing on, and we shape it, everything becomes a tool to surface to get the sound out. So accordingly, sorry, accordingly, instrumentation, your technique, your approach, everything is a tool to help you bring alive that
Mm,
sound.
right.
So I see it that way. And if you take that approach, it will help you bring out your own version of your music.
Mm,
And you would be more dynamic to be able to adjust as you grow, as you understand more deeply how you want to interpret your music.
right.
That means your technique and your piece and your music grows with you. And
Absolutely.
I tend to want to go on that path. And throughout my work with my students, I realized that they all have a little bit of a different technique. We have to approach it based on what kind of sound they're aiming for
Mhm.
and what they are capable of expressing or they're able to do physically at a certain age. Someone who's 5 or 6 years old won't be using the same level of technique as someone who is much more mature. But it evolves. If we understand that technique and musicality evolves with time, then we won't be fixated in, well, are we going to use this? What arm weight, finger technique? It's not about categorization of that, but what are we going to do based on just what we want to hear?
Right.
That's my goal. Mhm,
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I'm being an opera singer. Of course, what we're going after is the sound all the time and the
mhm,
expression of the sound,
right.
and I found it to be so important even from the very young age with the beginners and the intermediate,
Mhm,
and a lot of times I get a transfer student. They have no relationship with the sound. They're good students. They have good
mhm,
fingers, and they read well. And the parents told them they have to practice at least an hour every day because otherwise they'd be punished, right? And but they have no relationship with the sound. And so the question becomes, I can be so much more accurate than you will ever be if I just enter the notes into a piano, into a software.
mhm,
It will be perfect every time. I can even put in the expression mark. It will do
mhm,
exactly of everything I tell it to do.
mhm,
So what is the difference between you and the software?
mhm,
And it's not because you make mistakes sometimes. That's not the difference. Then of course we get that and the
mhm,
kids laugh, right? But it's that ability to understand what sound you want to make. And now I believe the kids need to listen to performances.
mhm,
And I believe that students need to know because I think it's to me it seems like classical music is so natural and inherent to me on what it should sound like, but I
mhm,
don't think that's true with a lot of kids today. So
mhm,
so I found it to be so important. I'm so grateful for YouTube, right? And so they can become inspired and they
mhm.
can hear the sound. How do you approach helping the students to cultivate their own ability to imagine the sound? Because I think you have to be able to imagine the sound first.
Mhm, mhm. Well, I think it's indeed a blessing that we have YouTube available for all the students to listen. Right now, any grand artists that
Mm,
have recorded videos are accessible now. And I generally, when I encourage my students to listen, I would prefer that they listen to different pianists. For example, I give them quite a large freedom to choose what they like to play. Of course, their repertoire that is within their scope, but
right.
I give them a
Yes.
choice so that they feel a level of participation and involvement, and they get a choice to play something they like also.
Mhm.
So within the scope of the pieces, I suggest they would listen. And I suggest them to listen to some great artists. I generally give them a list, but at the same time, I would like them to compare for different performers,
Yeah.
particularly performers from different era. And
Yes. Yes.
they
Such
would
different traditions.
Mhm. Yes, because like
Yes.
when you listen to Beethoven, well, right now, I mean, around this era, actually, most of the pianists that are on record labels, they have impeccable technique.
Right.
And they have made an error, it would be edited out. So it's not there. Now, if you listen to the old times, Solomon, Gisa King, Richter in concert, Shershakaski, there are mistakes galore. Now, they learn one thing: mistakes is part of being human. And if you know what to take off from the mistake, you are not comparing yourself against edited, perfect versions of extreme technical prowess nowadays. Because when you play live, look at what the grandmasters can do. Errors is not what we're looking for. When we listen to them, each of them have their different personality that came through in the music, that reflects their culture, it reflects their personality and character. And I want my students to be able to listen to these people and have and formulate their own version. They might be different from what we have nowadays and different from the grandmasters as well. But I find that music, you have to put in your own personal element as a performer. So it's not just emulating whose version. Now, I have a student that's so funny. He can emulate any style. He would say, I'm playing in the style of Horowitz. Now it turns to Glenn Gould. Now I'm
Schizophrenic.
yes.
How can you do the two of them back to back? Oh my God, multiple personalities going on.
And I said, well, then how does Angela play it? He stops and he folds his arms.
I love it. I love it. You know, it's interesting because in addition to listen to different pianists, I've had my students listen to different instruments. For instance, you know, when it comes to Schumann and also Brahms, the voicing and the way the melody is actually slightly disjointed and sometimes hard for a student to manage and imagine on the piano when they get into more advanced pieces. Like one of my students is playing the Brahms's intermezzo from the level 10 curriculum. And he really had a hard time imagining because the melody travels and it doesn't really, in our mind's ear, it doesn't stop. But of course, on the music, it's going vroom, stop, vroom, stop. So I ended up I sent him several recordings of different Brahms's leader because I'm being a singer, that's my repertoire, right? And so now you can hear clearly because the singing voice, unlike being on the piano, everything's being on the piano. Now I have a singing voice and I have the pianist. And the Brahms's leader are written so pianistically that to me, it's a very fine example for the students where they hear how the voice interweaves through the piano part. And the same issue I ran into with another student who was learning Fogel al Porfet. And because the melody is dum, brum, brum, da, 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 da. You can hear the bird. You can hear the bird. But when a student sits down and sight read through this, there is no bird. You know? There is no bird. We just have a bunch of notes that are like, oh, I'm having a lot of trouble with the rhythm because it doesn't make sense. Why is this about a bird? Why do I have to sound like a bird? You know? So then I will play Renato Hahn, Aclori, and that type of music that helps them to hear how the melody weaves in and out differently, and then listening to other instruments and orchestra where they can imagine colors. And because piano to me is very special, we can play so many colors and so many voices simultaneously. You know, as a singer, I cannot do that. I sing with as many colors as I can with one melody.
Right.
And when I'm playing the piano, that's when I feel more complete as a musician, because when I'm as much as I love the collaboration and I play a lot of piano forehand, and I love it. But it's only when I'm working on solo piano repertoire, I'm capable of a complete music experience at 2 o'clock in the morning by myself when I'm practicing. And to me, that's a pleasure, that's a joy and a privilege. So can you talk a little bit about that and how it relates to the students in their own personal experience and growth.
Of course. Well, I find it very important that if the student is trained where they have a palette of sound in their ears, that they know what they're listening for. And
Right.
also through the listening process, they are able to formulate, hey, this sound means what to me? They are actually constantly developing their repertoire of understanding and sound.
Mhm.
And when they get moved and touched, they have this connection with the music, and they would be able to recreate that kind of emotion or sound. I mean, kids are actually very, very intelligent. They sometimes when they listen, they don't just listen to the dimensions that they are expected. Of course, I know in the standard evaluation, they are evaluated. Do you get the pitch? Do you get the rhythm? Do you get the interval? But I noticed that little attention has been given to listen for what are the nuances. Is there a microscopic crescendo or decrescendo?
Mhm.
What exactly is the timing? Timing is often taught as metronomical timing, where is it two beats, 3 beats, 3/4, four
Right,
four.
right.
Now, how is that rubato being handled?
Mhm.
How do you space the gaps in between? Now,
Right.
sometimes they pick it up, they feel it, but if I try to explain to them in certain ways, describing them, then that experience is more concretized. They know, I feel that it's expressive because for that rubato where it stretches and creates the tension where it's gradual. Now, I never have assumptions that younger kids are unable to pick these up. I
You are
mean,
so right.
yeah,
They can,
they
but it's
can.
up to us to trust they can and help them to give them tools to access it.
Mhm. Exactly. I've seen little kids, they were good on the skateboard, on the little bicycle. They go at a full speed and suddenly they stop and skate. Nothing. They are so capable of handling timing without being able to calculate it, but their mind is able to adjust. So these kids, they hear it, just that you have to explain to them, hey, this is what you're sensing, and you can do it more, do it less. And just to put it in a way that they are able to understand. Now, I thought recently, actually, I taught a little kid. She is 6 years old, but she's playing a piece. It's the List No Moragan, and there's a lot. She's now her fingers are agile and she's able to play, but there are things that if she is a little bit heavy, it
Right.
sounds stuck. So I try to communicate to her in terms of her language. I said, imagine that you pour a soft drink into a glass and you see the bubbles rising, right? The little fizz. And you follow the fizz only goes up, it never goes down.
Mhm.
Now, imagine blowing the bubbles. Now, after that, I got her to do one little exercise. I told her mom, now give her this game to play. I asked her to mix detergent with water, okay, and shake, 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 shake it, and then pour it on a little dish and get a little toothpick to poke at the little bubbles. Now, and then the mom said, well, what are you trying to do? The idea is to train her to be focused, precise, quick, sharp release. And she's enjoying it. And that brings forth the idea of the bubbles. So some of the times when I teach my students, it sounds really weird that we may not play piano. So
I get it. I get it. But you know, it's I don't know if you are familiar with the neuro linguistic programming, how students learn the three modalities. This is addressing who they are, right? Meet them where they are. You have the oral, you have the kinesthetic, you have the visual, and this helps that little child relate in a way
right.
that makes sense to their mind. Because where did the sound come from? The sound come from the mind, the
Mhm.
imagination. And that's
Right.
the relationship between this and this and this, right?
Mhm. Exactly. So if they understand the sense of it, they are more likely to be able to do it. Just like the kid knows, oh, I better stop now or stop my bike because if not, I'm going to fall off and hit the.
Right.
They know.
Right.
You ask them to compute by the mathematical formula, but they know when they do it.
And you know what I love about what you just described is when you ask the child to go home and blow bubbles, you're
Hmm.
giving this child a message of freedom,
Hmm.
of not being stuck in front of the keys,
Hmm.
and this is it. It's already helping the child to relate their little life experience to the sound
Hmm.
immediately. There's a personalization in their relationship immediately to the music they're making, to their piano
Hmm.
playing, and they're not boxed in from the beginning. And they learn that from you because you told them, hey. You're gonna go home and you're gonna do this. It's gonna be so weird, and your parents are even going to question you, and they're probably gonna question me too. And I'll explain to them. But you get to have this experience. You're gonna have fun. You're gonna experience this. That's not just in front of the piano. That's not just on the bench. But I love that because there's a subliminal messaging in their development from the very beginning that way.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
not just what we say; it's what we do, right?
Exactly. Yes. So I feel that that way it keeps the child wanting more because it's fun and they enjoy it. And like if guided properly, there's nothing wrong with having too much fun. As long as they have that discovery along the way. And I also remember one funny thing. It's from the same kid. The mom during the lessons, I recommend them to take videos so that they can revise their lessons, so that it's kind of like bringing me home, and I can repeat
Yes,
this.
right. They're practicing with you 7 days a week, right?
Exactly. That's the best part of technology.
Mm.
And so, one part she filmed was I taught her at the concert hall in my school. And there's curtains. And I taught this little kid how to play Gollywog's Cakewalk at 6. Now, a lot better than me. I couldn't play it at 18.
Wow.
So I taught her. And so one scene was after dun 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 dun, there was a gap, and then you come back to the theme. Dun 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 dun. So it was hard for her to get that slowing down and coming back in the theme. So I brought her backstage and I said, you know what was going on there? Why was there a stop? The Gollywog was dancing and then suddenly he was shy. So he hit at the backstage,
Oh,
peeping through the curtains like this.
I love
And
it.
suddenly, you know what? The boss behind kicked him out from the stage. So he got kicked out and then he continued to dance.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And I still remember I make my little 10, 11-year-old boy students have to learn to waltz with me because their waltz was dinosaur stomping. Boom, 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 boom. They were being very accurate. Heavy, light, light, heavy, light. But you know, but you have to travel through the floor. You know, because it's not single measures. We have the whole thing to travel through. And so, you know, so those poor kids, their life experience we're giving them, right? I love it. I love it so much. This is so wonderful. So wonderful. And I think students and teachers, we have to stay inspired in order to inspire the students and continue to discover new ways of relating to in my case, I feel I need to continue to discover new connections with my music in order to be an inspiring teacher to the students. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, if I'm not fresh, my teaching is going to be stale, and it's that continuous growth on our part that helps me to relate to the continuous growth the children experience.
Exactly.
I think the old saying of those who can't teach, those days, it's never been true, because if you
Mhm.
can't, your teaching will be limited. If we don't continue to develop as far as we can, then a lot of times during our teaching, we become limiting to our students because we let them get away with things that will come back and hurt them. And
Mhm.
we don't give them enough freedom in areas where it will blossom and grow. And I think that's so important as teachers, we keep growing. And I have to say, I learned from you. I think you're wonderful.
learn from you too. And I feel I'm so lucky that I actually also learn from my students
Yes.
because even though they're very young, in the process of interacting them, I have to come up with new solutions to work with them.
Yes. Right.
And and so this is a mutual growth where we inspire one another. It doesn't mean that a little kid is less experienced, that he can't teach me anything.
Right.
We extract from within the situation what we can enrich ourselves. And the part I love what you said about you have to grow because if not, we number one, I feel if I don't grow, I'm doing a disservice to my students
Right.
because our students are growing at leaps and bounds at exponential rates. They
Right.
are, yes. So we have that, we are given this privilege to be sharing with them our experiences, but we should not let, I should not let my experience grow stale
Right.
because if it's shelved and dusty, it means nothing to this current world. I have to constantly change it so that it adapts to what that student needs. And
Right.
that's what I learned. And the
Right.
student would take it from there and continue in whatever journey. What I'm teaching is not necessarily that you must be a concert pianist. It's not about that. But based on what I've shared with you, you might extract similar principles
Right.
from the discipline, from the focus of attention, the attention to details that can help you if you apply it to across the board. It helps
Absolutely.
academically and everything else.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yes. And a friend of mine who's also a piano teacher, and she said one of her students from the early days of her teaching often still in touch with her and says the reason why he's a heart surgeon today was because of what he learned during his piano lessons. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. And Angela, I could talk with you forever, and I hope we have a part two of this sometime soon. And
I love
we're gonna stop right now, but it's not the end of our conversation. We're gonna have more. I just love it. It's very inspiring for me, and I'm so thank you for your generosity, your generous spirit to share. Because conversations like this keeps me going, both as a musician, as a teacher, and as a student. Because I feel we're always students, never stopping with that. So thank you so much, and let's have another conversation soon.
I look forward to that too. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.